Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Pleasure always to welcome back to the program Rick Perlstein, historian, writer at the American Prospect, author of Before the Storm, Nixonland, The Invisible Bridge, and Reaganland. If you want to get a sense of, what has taken place in this country, particularly, the last 50 to 30 years, I guess, or 50 to 30 years ago, where a lot of this trajectory that we have been on basically got started. Rick, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Let's talk about your latest piece in the American Prospect first. Anyways, I want to start there. Dr. Strange Kennedy. And this notion, because I see this, you referred to it as how you should learn to worry more about illiberal politics in liberal guise. I'm seeing this also too in the context of of populism, and we see various people sort of subscribing to specific nuggets within the agenda of what we're seeing in this administration positively. Right. Well, just give me a sense overall of what you're talking about here.
Well, I guess it would be kind of like if we're going to go reductio ad Hitlerium right off the bat, Hitler built the Autobahn kind of deal, right? Mussolini made the trains run on time, right? My bottom line is
the KKK. You cite the KKK promoting universal health care. And what was the other one? The Kaiser of Germany, Bismarck. Bismarck, Wilhelm Bismarck was the guy who invented, unemployment insurance, because he wanted the working class to support him when he, took over Africa and, mowed over the Catholics of Germany.
I just want to say, there's a version of this that I think they're trying to copy here on the right with Viktor Orban, right? Where he offers some social services and under the guise of trying to help people out, but it's really explicitly to reinforce, a patriarchal system, anti-LGBTQ system.
So it's one of these old playbooks, right? And the foundation of it that is as I've been thinking about this, recently and trying to put things together in a systematic way, is that right-wing politics, whether it goes by the name conservatism or authoritarianism or what they used to, proudly call in the early 20th century fascism, really is about hierarchy and authority, the right people being in control, people knowing their place. And, if that's the bottom line, really the kind of policies that you use to get there are, just tactical ultimately. Conservatives have been for big government, they've been for small government, right? The first big government agency in America really was the FBI, what became the FBI, and it was kind of created out of a moral panic about white slavery, which was kind of like the QAnon of the 19 teens, right? They can be for social policy, or they can be against social policy. They can be for law and order, or they can be for, the kind of whatever it is that Trump does, where his friends are all are all innocent and he's all criminals, right? So, in the case of a RFK Jr., a couple points can be made. One is that, even though, a lot of what he says is, very enticing and sounds quite humanitarian, taking apart big ag, nailing Big Pharma to the wall, which is also a big part of Project 2025. Even though it sounds enticing, it often means kind of eviscerating the kinds of institutions that it actually requires to do those things. But the other point I made in the piece is that there's actually a long tradition on the right of this kind of bodily purity politics, which is actually one of the scarier kind of fascist traditions on the right, right? And I gave as, the example from the early 60s, the right-wing crusade that held that fluoridation of water was a communist plot, right? So anyone who's seen Dr. Strangelove knows, that hilarious scene in which the right-wing general says that the communists are trying to sap our purity of essence. And have you ever seen a commie drink a glass of water, right? And I also gave the example of, back in the 90s when I was, researching before the storm, all of a sudden, Phyllis Schlafly, who I was yakking with on the phone, as one does.
Well, just remind people who Phyllis Schlafly was, because I think you and I remember, but I'm not sure anybody else does.
No.
Queen of the anti-feminist movement of the 1970s,
Yeah.
almost single-handedly, defeated the Equal Rights Amendment. And, there's a wonderful miniseries about her, Mrs. America, that you can see on Hulu, I think. Maybe it was Netflix. Anyway, she was basically one of the most powerful reactionaries and successful reactionary organizers ever. And she died in 2016, a huge, Trump fan. She kind of spans the era from McCarthy to Donald Trump. And she was on the phone, and she was just suddenly out of nowhere telling me about how pure the food was that she fed her children, right? So like health food, kind of making fun of health food was kind of a thing you made fun of the John Birch Society before hippies got a hold of it, right? So all these kind of scrambled kind of ideological associations, shouldn't fool us to the fact that, RFK Jr. is a crazy conspiracy theorist. And if you actually kind of dig down into how he thinks about how we're going to fix the food system and fix the pharma system, it really is quite creepy in that it kind of creates two classes of people, these kind of superior people and Untermenschen, right? The superior people who eat the right foods, which are often, very expensive, right? Who do the right exercise regimes, which are also very expensive, who take the right drugs, which, don't have anything to do with the democratic process of peer review, but are basically dictated from above, often with people who have financial interests in those drugs, right? So we look at that weird culture of, kind of right-wing food supplements and all that sort of thing. And they're superior. And we're all inferior for kind of messing around with this sort of rabble public health, right? The kind of stuff that, evil people like Dr. Fauci, mess around with. So, basically, don't buy it. RFK could be the guy who, presides over more deaths than a nuclear holocaust if he has his way. If we go back on something like the polio vaccine, one of the things I learned recently, making these arguments on the dreaded Twitter, is that it used to be when people were studying public health, or maybe they still do, students would go on walks of cemeteries. And you guys know why public health professors would take their students on walks of cemeteries on the first day of class, to show them what happened in the 1950s when the polio vaccine came about. That, how many babies died before widespread vaccination became a thing. So we're going to go back into this world where cemeteries are going to be full of infants if RFK Jr. and Donald Trump has their way.
I want to admit, I know Emma wants to talk a little bit about, the other sort of players who represent a similar thing in this. But Musk and
his natalism,
others.
really.
But,
yeah.
But how do you approach it from this perspective? Because okay, the KKK, for example, wants universal health care.
Right. So, the KKK thing was super weird. I had a pamphlet from the 1920s. It was a KKK pamphlet saying the government should give away free health care because they believed in the germ theory, right? And all these immigrants were so dirty and diseased that unless everyone could go to a doctor for free, we'd all die because of these diseased immigrants.
Well, okay. I disagree with their reasons for it, obviously. And, with Kennedy, there's no sort of structural answer to what he's talking about. It's all like he knows the right person to put in these things, and magically he's going to get the Republican Congress to outlaw certain chemicals and production. I mean, but part of me is like, well, that would be good. All right, the KKK is pushing for single payer health insurance, let's say, or free government sponsored health insurance. That would be good. How do I, as someone who does not want the rest of the program that would come along with these people, how do I respond to this? Because I'm looking at Bernie Sanders is saying to Musk, I want to cut the military, and I want to cut the military too. But in my reaction to like, Kennedy saying like he's going to regulate, I mean, because he doesn't say the word regulate, but that's the only way. Like if you're going to get these chemicals out of food, you got to pass laws that say these chemicals don't belong in food anymore. And I like the idea of like, yes, let's regulate the hell out of corporations and introduce that concept and mainstream it. But how do you respond?
Well, this is why it's all talk, Sam. And this is why, they're just not trustworthy vectors for this sort of thing.
Oh, I agree. But what's the proper response?
So, Sam Rayburn was one of the legendary politicians of the 40s and 50s. He was LBJ's mentor. He was the Speaker of the House. And he had a very wonderful saying that you should never forget, which is that any jackass can knock down a barn. It takes a carpenter to build something. These people are all jackasses, and they want to knock down, these sets of public health bureaucracies that have been built up over a very, very, very long time. And, sometimes they've failed us and sometimes they've succeeded, right? They definitely need reform. They definitely need fixing. All bureaucracies need reform and fixing. But if you just kind of knock them out with a meat axe, right? Like, the Vivek Musk, we're going to like get rid of half of all public employees. You're just destroying, decades of accumulated expertise, right? Decades of accumulated knowledge, wisdom, strategic capacity, institution building, and the idea is, this is kind of the fascist idea that you can just kind of build a new world by scratch by having the proper people in there with the kind of proper ideas. And that's the any jackass can knock down a barn, right? It'll cause chaos, right? And it'll turn everyone who works within this bureaucracy, which is just basically ordinary folks who, work hard and, you generally have the public interest in mind, into extensions of the will of very bad people, right? And they're just not trustworthy.
But all of that makes sense to me, but I'm saying like from and maybe it's more of an issue, for people like you or I, right? Or Emma, like how do we, is it just simply, we reject all of this because we know they're not going to do it? Or do we also, or is there also an element of like, that's a good thing, but they won't do it? And, or like, how does the part of society that doesn't want, because I was looking at, clips of people up in AOC's district. There's been a couple of different reporters who have gone up there and interviewed people, one locally, and you can hear the way that people are talking about, or you hear some people say, oh, he's only going to get rid of the criminal, immigrants and not other immigrants. And what's the job of those of us who don't want the authoritarianism to use their promises for issues that we support, so that if we get past this stage, those issues still have a resonance, and or that their failure to deliver ends up costing them.
Right. I mean, I think that I would point to the 900,000 unnecessary deaths that happened, under Donald Trump's presidency, in the year 2000, if that was, I referred to 900,000 specifically because that was a study that was done. If we had the same rate of deaths during COVID as Australia had, we would have saved 900,000 lives. And Australia was a country that actually was the prime minister was a conservative. He was actually a global warming denier, but he just did the normal things of turning it over to these boring public health bureaucracies, turning it over to boring freaking experts, and said, you guys are in control. You guys are in charge. I'll listen to you instead of you listening to us, right? And it's a tricky thing, Sam. It's really kind of one of the contradictions, the paradoxes, of small d democracy, that you do have to defer to experts, and expertise is not always democratic, right? It's the kind of do your research stuff that populism is very compelling, right? Do your research often, unfortunately, means you do a Google search, and the bad guys know how to manipulate search very well. And, they do search engine optimizations. So if you, Google trans, and the first thing you come up with is, the trans person who wants to play on the volleyball team, not the person who almost died from gender dysmorphia, right? So, we have to kind of, there's no magic bullet, because you have to do this difficult thing of saying you have to defer to experts who know more than you.
But you and I both agree, like, we would love the defense budget on principle, and not just on principle, but also like as a shift in foreign policy, to be half the size, a quarter of the size, an eighth of the size, whatever. We could pick, any reduction, like instead of like adding $80 billion every year would be a good start. I don't think that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are really interested in cutting it, other than they are maybe like, hey, it'd be more efficient if we had Tesla build like whatever it is. Right. But the idea that they are, promulgating this, right? How many times have we heard like Reagan, issued amnesty for immigrants, and that being leveraged as a way of trying to sort of like mainstream these ideas.
I think, you just say the people, you just point to the people involved to say they're liars, and point out the way they lied. Point to how much money Elon Musk gets from the federal government. Point to all the lies he made about driverless cars. We're gonna have them by the year 2000. Point to the lies of Donald Trump saying he's gonna get rid of Obamacare, right? Like, why would you trust the word these people say? He doesn't really have to get much further than that. I can say, I'm gonna make all 5'5" people 6 feet tall. And doesn't mean you have to take it seriously, because I'd be lying, right?
Right. Unless we wanted all 5'5" people to be 6 feet, and then we'd be like, that's a good idea, but he's not going to do it.
Right. Or you can say all the things that he said he's going to do that he's not going to do. Right. You can say that, all these defense programs, every major, weapon system has a component that's built in, they have 435 components. Each one is going to be built in a different congressional district. So every member of Congress has a stake in that weapon system, sticking around. You can say these things are complicated, and these people don't have any idea about how to do anything that's complicated, right? You can say, sure, maybe the Ku Klux Klan wanted socialized medicine, but they were going to only have socialized medicine for white people, right? And we're in a terrible situation because, as you know, and I'm sure talk about a lot all the time, we're in such a degraded information environment, right?
Right.
That, Mark Twain said, a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth can lace up its boots. Now it can go around the world 50 or 60 times before you even turn on your computer, right? So, a lot of this is just going to have to be kind of like peer-to-peer stuff,
that's my question for you, Rick, is just like what you bring up, that corroded media environment. And I agree with you that we have to point out that these folks are disingenuous, but like, what's the utility right now? I'm struggling with pointing out that Trump is a liar. The world knows he's a liar. In fact, part of why I thought Harris would win was because a majority of independents think that he lost the 2020 election. That seems to be outside of his cult, widely understood. We've had now 8 years of fact checks and Pinocchios and everything that under the sun. The problem is,
and just kind of the scales are not going to fall from everybody's eyes one day.
Right, and
nobody cares about the deaths.
No
either
one cares about
from
those,
COVID. That's what's amazing to me.
The corroded media environment that you talk about, and I know it's like a little coastal elite to talk about this, but like when you see some of this exit polling data, and it's just a small piece of the information, but a lot of the Trump voters that broke for him, specifically late deciders who just came out and voted for him, didn't vote down ballot Republican. They just voted for Trump and walked away. It seems as if a majority of them get their information from social media. I don't know what the answer is there, and I'm curious what you think.
We had more charismatic leaders who, had kind of a bold way of thinking about this kind of stuff. It kind of sucks to call for kind of what they used to call a man on horseback. But, Donald Trump, a lot of the reason he appeals to people is just, good old fashioned charisma. Which is not something you can kind of order from a catalog or put in a bottle. I was just thinking, I was at a party the other day, and I was, drunk and high as one gets at a party, and one has, one's best ideas. It's legal in Illinois, so I'm good. And we're like, if we had a real resistance that was, kind of had valor and creativity and cleverness already, there would be some kind of symbol, right? Some kind of song, some kind of meme, that people would be kind of glomming onto, like, the old, kind of like Star Wars resistance symbol, right? I just don't, and I'm not it, I'm not the charismatic leader, right? I know lots of stuff, I can explain lots of stuff, but explaining doesn't do it. Who are the people who are really, kind of go out there and kind of inspiring us and putting their bodies on the line? And, I'm sure they'll emerge, but, that's another thing about, another paradox of democracy, is you have to sometimes you have to trust experts and bureaucrats, which who wants to do that? It'd be much better if we could just all come up with our own ideas and do our research for ourselves. But, leadership is important. Someone like FDR who said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, or a martyr like JFK. The only reason, Lyndon Johnson was able to pass the Civil Rights Act and, Head Start and the war on poverty was because he said, we have to honor the fallen martyr, right? This is the magic stuff of politics, right? And it's, we're very good at the rational stuff in politics, right? Hopefully, there's a generation of people who, say things like, actually, we want immigrants in our country,
right?
Not, we're gonna turn away immigrants faster than and more efficiently than Republicans are. Someone who can come up with a kind of compelling moral vision, Unfortunately, there's lots of kind of bottlenecks and roadblocks from keeping that happen from our only friend in the world, the Democratic Party, and like Frederick Douglass said about the Republicans for black men in the late 19th century, the Republican Party is the boat, all else is the sea, right? This is the only vehicle we have right now that's kind of built into the structures of, our electoral politics. But, young leaders are going to come forth,
Do we have any type of precedence for this? Because, you talk about the sort of lack of response. And I remember when Reagan was elected and reelected in particular, but also when Bush was reelected, like there seems to be
the precedent was us, in the early 2000s, this incredible blogosphere that came out of nowhere. And, one of the reasons, Bush wasn't able to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish, which was basically create a permanent Republican majority by wiring the system, was this kind of steady resistance that was, just turning him into a laughingstock.
But I feel a greater demoralization in this era than then. Like, and it was, 2004, into 2005 was demoralizing, but this seems greater. And it seems to me that what what Bush did was he took aim at Social Security, and that was like basically like the one thing that snapped everybody out of it and got people
taking aim at comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah, and he undermined his own base by doing that too. And I get the sense, like, I'm looking at Trump with this whole sort of immigrant thing. He threatens Mexico, and to basically, we better get to essentially net zero immigration. Well, we're already almost there.
Right.
And so it's like he's coming in and saying, like, you know, it's like me walking out right now at 10 of 1 and go, it better be about an hour after noon, 7 minutes from now, or there's going to be hell to pay. And then 7 minutes later, it's okay. I've gotten my way, and he takes the credit from it. He's smart about this.
Yeah. But that's the scariest part, is that he has nothing that he can deliver, right? It's like, it's all fake promises. And, you know, part of it says, oh, well, once people see the inflation and da-da-da-da-da. But that's the scary part about, you know, that's why this word fascism is so useful, right? Because anything bad can be blamed on the scapegoats, right? The deep state got in our way, right? So let's destroy the deep state, right? You know, we had to, you know, we weren't able to, you know, lower the size of the military because, you know, there are too many, you know, whatever is the enemy du jour, you know, kind of burrowing within the Pentagon, right? So yeah, I don't have any good answers for that, right? You know, I'm hearing very scary speculation, you know, that, you know, and I'm just going to say it. I don't have any evidence yet. Let me just say that this is, you know, kind of very off the top of my head speculation that I'm looking into, that, you know, when there are jobs that can't get done because people getting deported, well, maybe they'll turn to, you know, prison labor, right? And you get this spiraling downward, you know, more and more hatred, you know, more and more exploitation of vulnerable people. One of the things my alderman in Chicago, Andre Vasquez, who's been in charge of, you know, kind of making kind of migrant policy for Chicago, he points out is, yeah, there's going to be a serious problem with crime with the migrants who come, but they're going to be the victims of the crime, right? Because they're not going to be able to advert to the authorities. They're not going to be able to go to the cops. They're going to be the most vulnerable people, right? They're going to be taken advantage of. That's, you know, the sick, cynical deal that the Republicans have about immigration is, you know, the cynical ones, you know that they can simultaneously get the rubes to want to deport everyone and have the business elites be able to take advantage of their labor, and, you know, nothing will happen. But, you know, now we have this kind of deal that they had with abortion where, you know, maybe the dog is going to catch the car and they won't know what to do with it, right? But I don't really find any comfort in that, because the kind of the more kind of distrustful society becomes, and the more elites are able to kind of weaponize people's kind of feral instincts, you know, the harder it is to build something in its stead. Which is why, you know, when societies fall to authoritarian politicians and authoritarian politics, often the only thing that ends it is cataclysm, you know, war.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not glib, you know.
Do we have a historical precedent to something like this? I mean,
I think Chile, you know, is an example where a country that, you know, really became a fascist country, and, you know, over the decades, it just kind of ground away at, you know, Pinochet and his followers, and eventually built a democracy. You know, South Africa is another one, right? I mean, you had, you know, white minority rule for, you know, decades and decades and decades. And there was kind of a political and guerrilla effort that, you know, received, you know, basically the moral sympathy of the entire world. Now South Africa is a democracy, right? But that's the kind of level we're talking about, right? And one part of the reconstruction that has to happen is, you know, people have to learn that government, you know, run by public spirited people, can actually do things to help them. And that's not something that that's not kind of an intuitive knowledge that people can regain in the course of an election or even 3 elections. That's kind of decades of work right there, right?
Right. And you need a party
A party
that is oriented towards both doing and communicating that.
Yes. So we're going to need some doers and we're going to need some communicators. And, hopefully, we'll be hearing from people whose names we don't even know yet that will become household names. Martin Luther King wasn't Martin Luther King. He was just some, 27-year-old, minister who somehow got a job in, Montgomery, a church in Montgomery. And they're like, who are we going to have to run this bus boycott? Oh, let's have this guy Martin do it because no one else wants to do it because it's too much, And, next thing you know, you have the Civil Rights Act 8 years later.
Well, but the leadership point I just want to return to, because I know we're making this case over and over again. But part of why we're in this situation at all is because we've had a leadership vacuum at the top of the Democratic Party for almost in Biden's entire term. I would say really when Build Back Better fell apart, and also seemingly when his cognitive decline kind of accelerated. There was no one at the top of the party communicating the message. Nobody. Yes. And I think it added to this sense of like, well, they're lying about how old he is. And where is that dude? Yeah. We can't trust either side. And then he didn't set Harris up in any meaningful way. They just ran. I
think we're still building back from the distrust, the trust that was lost among working class people because of NAFTA in 1990, whatever.
Exactly. And then the Build Back Better stuff, that and the expiration of the child tax credit, that's Joe Manchin and the Republicans. But that's
I saw a lot of hope. And, I saw my kind of little, margin of hope in the Harris ticket was, the fact that she chose a running mate who was basically like a Scandinavian social democrat and made, the COVID kind of tax rebates permanent in Minnesota, right? But, people didn't buy that either,
Well, they didn't, it seemed like the campaign didn't particularly buy that after, basically starting with the convention. They decided we did enough by actually just picking him and not using him. But be that as it may, I guess here we are. All right, let's just briefly, because also I think an example of this, a version of what you're talking about too, was this Andreessen interview on Joe Rogan. And not just like, if it's just some rando on Joe Rogan who's basically spewing, 100% lies. About the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Lies.
Like 100% lies. Elizabeth Warren controls it. They actually do this. Unbanking was the only thing that he could say. And literally, this is an agency that was telling banks, like, you need to do a better job of making sure that your unbanking isn't so arbitrary and that it's like, and this is supposedly
propaganda. It's like the opposite of what's actually happening.
100%. But Elon Musk, tweets out this thing, says interesting or disturbing or whatever it is. They're using it all as an example to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is inhibiting their ability to use crypto and to use basically, to do money laundering and all this other stuff.
Turn the entire American financial system into a casino where the House has the advantage.
But how do we fight that when there is like a, this type of communication sort of imbalance?
Told the innocent fly on the wall in his house that OxyContin is a good thing because it keeps the rabble down. Oh, by the way, that was me, as you know.
Well, no, tell that story because I don't think people, I know, but I don't think others do.
So you can Google my name and Mark Andreessen, and it's probably next to the long con where I talked about all the grifting that Republicans do. It's probably the most read thing I've ever written. I was flown to San Francisco, all expenses paid, to meet with his book club. Mark Andreessen, the guy who's did something useful. He helped start Netscape in the 1990s and then became a venture capitalist. And I went to his $30 million mansion, which had these priceless works of art by like, Agnes Martin and Klaus Oldenburg and all these people that his wife was really astonished I knew the names of, because apparently, computer bros don't, have much culture. And and in the course of the conversation, he comes from rural Wisconsin, and he talked about how much contempt he had for the people he grew up with, and that he wanted all those places to just kind of go away. And if people don't leave, they deserve what they get. And he eventually said, almost a direct quote, "I'm happy for OxyContin and video games to, keep people in line." And the funny thing is, when I pointed that out online, one of the crypto bros said, "Well, it's true." It's just a sociological fact, that people act out. And I was like, well, unless you realize that, economies can be more and less fair, and I did one of these things where I, decided I just needed to win this argument. So I, checked out the crime rate in all these countries. And of course, the ones that had the highest levels of inequality and were the ones that had the highest crime rates and the most people acting out. It's this idea that, anyone can knock down a barn, but it takes a carpenter to build one. You need to build societies that create trust and respect. And that's hard, right? And these guys just want to rip it down. And they have absolute contempt for human beings and absolute contempt for, they order the world into lesser and greater types of human beings. And they get ordinary people without any power or resources to repeat their propaganda. And they obviously have, the tools, to kind of to choose to what was that other great George W. Bush line, Sam, to vault the propaganda or something like that.
What was it? I'm uniquely American.
Oh yeah, that was another one. It was uniquely American to have 4 jobs.
Yeah.
So ultimately, look, this is the bottom line. I have no easy answers, right? There are no easy answers, but really it's going to come down to kind of, the community of people who, value trust and respect and love and mutuality, just kind of every day doing everything they can in their daily lives, to realize that we're in the fight for our lives and making sacrifices for that fight.
Rick Perlstein, historian, writer at the American Prospect, also soon to be. I've heard rumors about something launching at the beginning of the year. Are you at liberty to talk about it?
Kind of a soft launch at the beginning of the year, but Wikipedia, my podcast and Substack, will be launching officially on Valentine's Day as a gift to my readers, who I love so very dearly and people for. And it's going to be, I'm going to be doing a lot of interviews with people really about their lives and the choices they've made in their lives. And it's going to include politics, but it's going to include all kinds of other interests I have too, which is why it's going to be called Wikipedia. And I have a very well-known broadcaster whose name I shall not, because we haven't confirmed it yet, who's, for example, we're going to do an interview about our shared passion for bass fishing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
It rhymes with Machel Radau.
Machel Radau. Okay. Bass fishing. This is, I assume, with the fly rod.
No. The boring real kind,
Oh, all right.
Yeah, that was the promotion I ever gave. No one wants to listen to Toastmasters.
Yeah, you don't want to say, well, let's keep the door open on the fly fishing part about it. Yeah, Rick Perlstein, we will put links to all of your stuff over at majority.fm and the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.